Several organizations from around Massachusetts are trying to strengthen protections from sexual harassment and violence, along with improving services. To tell us about the effort are the policy director from Jane Doe Inc. Massachusetts, Maureen Gallagher, and the co-executive director from the network, or La Red, Beth Leventhal. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to start with Maureen because right now one of the things that you were recently concerned about was the state of violence and services. What about that right now?
Yes, so in Massachusetts, we were very fortunate after much advocacy and hard work that the state legislature awarded an additional $3 million for services in fiscal year 19. And so we're at the State House now daily and communicating with legislators to make sure that that funding remains in the budget, but to also pivot a little bit and really start to focus on the prevention of sexual violence and domestic violence. So that's a key priority of Jane Doe and our members is to have some investment from the state in really developing community-based, school-based prevention programs to actually address this problem before the violence actually occurs.
Beth, you represent the LGBT community and serve them. What about their unmet needs right now?
Well, there are plenty of unmet needs, unfortunately. We are the largest domestic violence focused organization that we work statewide. There's really only one other that works statewide. And beyond that, there are just small pockets of services. And so it's really very difficult for LGBTQ survivors to find emergency housing and emergency shelter, transitional housing. It can be difficult for people to find even support groups or hotlines that are willing to talk with them.
And Maureen, we can talk about prevention because this can start in a whole bunch of different areas. Educational settings, start with colleges. We've heard a lot about that already. There's some rules changes from Washington. What are you trying to do here in Massachusetts?
Well, it's interesting because many of our priorities and our legislation and budget are very connected around these kind of issues. So our campus sexual assault legislation would really ensure that every campus is offering student services both on and off campus, ensuring that they have sound policies for students so that they know who they can report to if something happens to them, what their options are, but also training and education for students and staff and faculty to really understand the issues and also know how to appropriately respond when these are happening on campus. But it's also very connected to prevention because we don't want college campuses to be the first place that students are hearing prevention messages.
Beth, I know you're concerned about partner violence, but what about violence faced by the LGBT community? It could be a kid in school who's getting bullied or in the workplace. What about that?
Oh yeah, it's still unfortunately homophobic, biphobic, and transphobic violence against students in particular, but anybody of any age is still unfortunately rampant. And so, then that's one of the things that makes it difficult for our communities to acknowledge domestic violence and sexual violence within our communities, because it's really clear that sort of the enemy is outside. You know, that where we are in most danger is when we are on the street, when we are with our families of origin who don't accept us, when we are in our places of worship who don't accept us, when we are, you know, facing school bullying. And that makes it difficult for people to also say, and within our communities, we also experience violence.
This has been News, and we're talking with Beth Leventhal from the network and Maureen Gallagher from Jane Doe Inc. Maureen, another thing you're concerned about in the State House is the teaching of sexuality. When I was growing up, there were debates about sex education. What's the difference here?
Well, unfortunately, it's still a debate. Not all schools offer sex education. There's a lot of discussion about whether this should be taught in the schools. And the Act Relative to Healthy Youth bill that we're advocating for isn't even a mandate. But what it does say is that schools who are teaching sexuality education must teach it in a way that is medically accurate and age appropriate. And additionally, that there are subjects taught around consent and that curriculum is inclusive of LGBTQ survivors. And that's a really important component that we're advocating for this year. We really just want students who are exposed to this education to really have a full breadth of information to help to see themselves represented, but to also create safety for communities such as the LGBTQ community.
Beth, I can see somebody coming to an agency like yours because they're in a crisis. They want safety, first of all. What happens after that?
Well, we're set up to be able to provide much more than crisis. People do call us in crisis on our hotline, which is open 24 hours a day. People come to us when they are homeless in a crisis situation around housing. But we also provide transitional housing that lasts for up to 2 years to help people really get back on their feet, so to speak, from dealing with whatever it is that they were left without or left with in the aftermath of abuse. We also offer ongoing support, individual and support groups. We offer advocacy sort of across the board around whatever it is that a survivor might need.
Beth, another concern you have is about whether we should have something like sanctuary cities in Massachusetts. And I know the federal enforcers say if we have that, we'll never catch the really bad people. But you're concerned about immigrants, maybe women who've been abused in some way. What's it like for them, and what are you trying to do for them?
Well, I would also not use the term sanctuary because I feel like that has a meaning and a definition that's interpreted in different ways to different people. But what we do believe is that survivors of sexual and domestic violence, folks experiencing violence who are also immigrants, face significant barriers, and the added barrier of not being able to call law enforcement if they feel that they need support, in many cases not even seeking services because they're afraid of the outcomes, is really a problem. And we believe that immigrants in Massachusetts, whether or not they're documented, should have access to the same safety and supports as anybody else.
We should finally mention, Maureen, you've got a website people can go to for more information?
Yes, www.janedoe.org, and we have a Find Help section so you can find local programs in your area.
And Beth, you also, I'm sure, have something
Yes.
that people should turn to?
Yes, it's tnlr.org.
Thank you both very much for being with us, Beth Leventhal and Maureen Gallagher.